From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie A Trip to the Moon, released in 1902, starring George Méliès, Victor Andre, and Bleuette Binoche. Please forgive me if I have some of the pronunciations a little mixed up because they are French and I am not French. I am trying though. This film was directed by George Méliès. The synopsis is a group of astronomers travel to the moon and battle aliens. This wonderful 13-minute movie was the creation of French filmmaker George Méliès. He was an illusionist at a theater when he attended a special event demonstrating a cinematograph from the Lumiere brothers in 1895, which inspired him to take his act to the next level in moving pictures. Méliès traveled to London to buy an animatograph sold by the Edison Manufacturing Company. By the next year, he was showing his handcrafted films at his theater on a daily basis between 1896 and 1913. He directed over 500 films, all embracing a whimsical and theatrical display of magical tricks using visual illusions with editing and what is now called in-camera effects. He showed the world what could be done with film to create fantasy fiction on screen. No film exemplifies that more than his most famous work, A Trip to the Moon, shown in 1902. The film was loosely based on the novel From the Earth to the Moon, a direct route in 97 hours, published in 1865 by Jules Verne. Originally, scientists of the day thought that space travel was theorized to happen through the propulsion of a gun shooting astronauts into space in a capsule, or a bullet-shaped casing. In the book, the Baltimore Gun Club built an enormous space gun and launched 3 people to the moon. A Trip to the Moon goes a bit further, giving us a look at the fantasy world of the moon and the adventures therein. The story proceeds that instead of the gun club, Méliès used an astronomy club. The professor in charge is played by Professor Barbenfoulis, who proposes an expedition to the moon with 5 astronomers who agree to take part in this experiment. The beauty of this scene is that the set is a mixture of actual furniture with a drawn backdrop to give the audience a clear indication that the space is an old institution, perhaps an old university. This is using some of the simplest principles of set designs for a theatrical play, and I love that simplistic creativity. You can use the same space to create any scene you want. Today, green screens are most commonly used to do this, to drop anyone into a scene. Besides these set pieces, Méliès built his own film studio in 1897, which had glass walls and a glass ceiling to let in as much light as possible during daytime hours. It's a concept that was used by many still photography studios at the time due to the limitations on lighting technology. As a result, he had to schedule his day very strictly to make the most of daylight, while he managed his theater shows at night. The rocket ship in the moon adopts the same bullet shape that is described in the book, ready to be shot out of a huge cannon into space. It looks flat, but there is a curvature in the structure to actually fit some of the astronauts inside. There may have been another exit point to have the astronauts leave as more are entering, so that way it looks like the bullet ship can fit all of the 5 men. All of these enormous props were created in a certain style, and all of the props and backgrounds seem to follow suit, keeping it relevant in this world for the best enjoyment by the audience. It's one of the reasons why live-action 2D animation doesn't always work. There's a jarring difference, and I bring that up to show you that Méliès had a natural eye for composing the two together. The Marines, who are young women in sailors' outfits, sees the astronauts off in the celebration as the man in the moon spies on the approaching ship before it wedges itself into his right eye. It's a wonderful comedic effect using makeup, prosthetics, camera tracking, creating a zooming effect, and jump cut editing. The shot looks as if it's zooming in on the man on the moon, but actually a pulley-operated chair was placed on a rail-lifted ramp, which placed the actor, who was covered up to the neck in black velvet, on a chair and pulled him in toward the camera to create the effect. Again, another practical way to make a big impact. Now, the scenes on the moon were the earliest glimpses of a proposed other world on screen. We are led to understand that it was an atmosphere of air, gravity much like Earth's, and cosmic bodies were entities that in fact interact with the real world, making it snow on the satellite. In this wonderful display of early special effects, we see Méliès's invention of the double exposure, transitional dissolves, and matting. The professor uses his umbrella to compare the size of the mushrooms in a cave, when suddenly the umbrella turns into a mushroom. This is clearly one distinct moment where Méliès sets up the shot, keeping all of the actors still while replacing the umbrella with a mushroom, and then edited the two scenes together. It is called the substitution splice technique. It is a simple visual illusion, but it was an effect he discovered one day accidentally while filming a city scene. He wasn't the first to use this kind of effect, actually. Edison did it before with a movie called The Execution of Mary Queen of Scots. It was a relatively underutilized effect until Méliès's use of the technique to depict magical and supernatural events. At the time, it amazed audiences and it broke new ground. On the moon, the astronauts encounter alien inhabitants called the Selenites, named after one of the Greek moon goddesses, Selene. I love the look of the Selenites, which resemble insectoids or even lobsters. As a costume lover, even though we only get a brief few scenes of the Selenites, I remember being awe-inspired seeing the gathering of the Selenites in the throne room, who were played by skilled acrobats. Méliès hired his actors mainly through his connections in the theatrical industry, and one of the perks of being one of his actors is at noon, everyone received a free meal. To get the look of the Selenite costumes, Méliès personally made them using cardboard canvases from plaster molds he created. It's just so fascinating to understand the level of production he put into this film at a time when these strategies were not so far off from what we do today. Ultimately, the astronauts escape the Selenites and the rocket ship falls off the tip of the moon to fall into Earth, landing in the ocean. That effect was also very eye-catching because the total effect was created through multiple exposure shoots of the capsule falling in front of a black background. It was then superimposed upon the footage of the ocean. The underwater portion of the ocean was created by combining shots of a moving cardboard cutout of the capsule with an aquarium containing tadpoles. To wrap up the story, the astronauts take on the role of superiority by being rather aggressive out of fear, initializing violence, and eventually bringing back a Selenite slave to Earth as the film ends. Perhaps this has something to say about colonization and hostilities against other cultures, but the idea is short and the film is over. At 13 minutes, it was the longest film at the time and the most expensive, costing about 10,000 to 30,000 francs and 3 months to make it. To polish off the experience for the audience, many prints of A Trip to the Moon were individually hand-colored. In order to do this, an assembly line of painters, usually of women, were assigned a specific color to work on for each frame to get the desired results. There was no specific music for the film, but in 1903, English composer Ezra Reed published a piano piece called A Trip to the Moon, Cosmic Descriptive Fantasia, used as a score for the film in some showings. From September to December 1902, a hand-colored print of A Trip to the Moon was screened at Méliès's theater and was being sold to different theaters. It was a hit in Europe, the United States, and South America. One of those initial buyers sold the print to the Edison Manufacturing Company. Edison duplicated and sold them to other firms. Méliès's films were being redistributed without his knowledge and sometimes uncredited, and he did not even receive a dime for this blatant piracy. One of the earliest and ugliest cases. By 1908, Méliès's magical films became a thing of the past, and his films were also deemed too expensive to buy. At this point is when he began having financial troubles competing in the film industry, and it was becoming very hard to make films. In 1917, his offices were taken over by the French military. His films were melted down for traces of silver to make boot heels. Can you believe that? His theater was demolished in 1923, and in a moment of anger, he burned all of his remaining negatives of his work. Many of his works were just lost forever at that point. A Trip to the Moon was lost at this point, and around the late 1920s, it was actually rediscovered when nostalgic cinephiles remembered Méliès's contribution to film. A Gala Méliès was held for him in Paris on December 16, 1929, to celebrate his life's work, and he was awarded the Legion of Honor in 1931. Though copies of the film were around, many of them were damaged or incomplete. In 1932, his film collection was bought by the Museum of Modern Art in 1936 and provided screenings of A Trip to the Moon. Unfortunately, most of his films are still lost forever in time. An original hand-colored print of the film was discovered in 1993, and in 2002, another cut of the film was discovered in a barn in France, also hand-colored. The film was restored to its full glory in 2011, at least at the most we believe is its full glory, at Technicolor's laboratories in Los Angeles with a cost of $1 million and took a year to complete. It premiered on May the 11th, 2011 at the Cannes Film Festival. A Trip to the Moon was named one of the 100 greatest films of the 20th century by The Village Voice, and the film is listed in the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, edited by Steven Schneider. I remember seeing this film, and it being my first silent film as a child, I just remembered loving it so much and wondering how it was all done. I love admiring the growth of filmmaking, and this movie really lets you enjoy that. The story was not elaborate, but the story was not as important to Méliès than creating the visual wonders for the audience to enjoy. This is truly a remarkable film with a wonderful display of imagination from a cinematic pioneer. I like to end this with a small paraphrased quote from Méliès, who said, "A Trip to the Moon was surely not one of my best, but it left an indelible trace because it was the first of its kind." My rating is an 8.7. Well, that sums up my review. I hope you liked it, and if you did, I've got over 120 of these videos, so go on ahead and browse the channel to see more reviews from me like this. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to be notified of my next video. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.